Hello, welcome to episode 2 of Thinking Out Loud. So why am I doing this? I had mentioned in the last episode that I have a list of 10 and ever-growing number of topics that I've been wanting to write about, especially to support the launch of the Wiring the Winning Organization book that came out on Thanksgiving week. But I must admit, after 3 years of writing, after a really intense and difficult 2023 of more writing, I'm finding it really difficult to start and finish these articles. And so the Ideal podcast is coming back. We've got a ton of content already recorded that I'm excited to bring to you. We have more coming in 2024, but that's even more difficult than writing. So thus, this Thinking Out Loud podcast, shorter form video podcast, will it work? And I'm actually finding it very energizing and fun. So in the last episode, we talked about the 3 mechanisms of performance: simplification, slowification, and amplification. And I shared a bunch of write-ups of the Nordstrom case study, the Cloudflare outage, the Google We Have No Moat, of viewing these case studies, stories, post-incident reviews through the lens of Slowify, Simplify, and Amplify. And I think it's just amazing how it shows and reveals surprising insights. So the principal parsimony says that it's amazing when you can explain the most with the least. So I think this is just increasing validation that the 3 mechanisms of Slowify, Simplify, and Amplify can express almost everything that is required to transform from good to not good, and view things like post-incident reviews to reveal the absence of these mechanisms. There's another mechanism I want to share with you that I didn't talk about last time, which is the metaphor of moving a couch. And this is really a metaphor for joint problem solving and cognition. And this is something that for months I've wanted to actually do something similar to what I did last time in the last episode, of getting an LLM to be able to use this metaphor to view case studies. And kind of the suspicion, something that I had like some level of conviction writing the book, but just never had a chance to prove, is that this metaphor is actually enough to recognize, to express all the things that you might see in an organization where things go wrong easily, either in the degree of coupling or in the degree of cohesion. So let me first go to, so speaking of the abstract, let's talk about those mechanisms of performance. So in the book, we have this vignette of Steve and Jean moving a couch. And you might think that this is actually just a lot of brawn work, no brain work allowed or needed. But this is actually a ton of problem solving and brain work that is required. And so among the problems that Steve and Jean need to solve are figuring out where is the center of gravity, around which axis do you rotate in order to get it through a narrow doorway. And if you want to move it down a narrow winding staircase, who goes first and what direction do they face, forwards or backwards? And what's remarkable is that Steve and Jean can solve these problems without bringing in consultants, without running focus groups, just by picking up the couch, by trial and error, by experimentation, with fast feedback loops, and communicating and coordinating. They will figure out with a high degree of confidence. Steve and Jean should figure out how they can move this couch to where they need to go. But it is amazing that leaders can do many things that can make their work more difficult. For example, we can turn off all the lights, right? So the work becomes far more treacherous. The work will take longer. They might hurt themselves. They may damage the couch. They can even damage the rooms that they transit through. So this makes the problem more difficult. We can also make the problem more difficult by introducing a lot of background noise, so like a siren, loud music. And what's interesting is that this changes the difficulty of the problem, but in a different way than turning off the lights. This makes it more difficult because it makes it more difficult for Steve and Jean to coordinate and communicate with each other. So as leaders, we can also make the work even more difficult by preventing Steve and Jean from talking to each other. So suppose we put in an intermediary, that all messages have to pass through them. Or maybe we require that Steve and Gene work and communicate only through JIRA tickets or work orders, or go through account managers who bring in lawyers. And so these are all things that make it difficult or maybe even impossible for Steve and Gene to solve a problem together. And so Steve and Gene are no longer able to work as a team. They are now two people independently working to move a couch. And so this really captures two key concepts that we think are critical for every leader. And what's exciting to me is that this will be very familiar for anyone familiar with software architecture. The first concept is coherence. Coherence is defined by to what degree are Steve and Gene able to act as a unified whole that allows for consistent and logical behavior. There's another thing about coherence, which means that everything that they need is at hand. It's local to them. It's within reach. So we also have a term in software about locality. Is it near us? Right? If things aren't near us, right, we are no longer coherent. The second concept is coupling. Is that when Steve and Gene move a couch together, they are inherently coupled together through the couch. What affects the couch affects Steve and Gene. If something affects Gene, it therefore affects Steve, and vice versa. And so consider how this is different than Steve and Gene moving two chairs independently of each other, right? In this case, in the case of two chairs, they don't need to communicate and coordinate. Although, if they have to go through a door at the same time, right, or if it's in a crowded room with 100 other people moving chairs, there is some need for coordination. But let me just put in your head, when you look at a problem, is it something where it should be coupled together like a couch, or is it decoupled and should be decoupled so that they have independence of action, right? And that too creates incredible value. So in software architecture, we can actually say some really make some strong assertions, right? When we say something is less coupled, we can change something by changing only one side of the interface. When something's coupled together, you have to make changes on both sides of the interface. So let's go through what I did last night that I'm just so excited by. So what I did is I put into ChatGPT. I recited, essentially what I just walked you through here, describing this couch metaphor. And then I asked it to opine on what this metaphor can illuminate about two different scenarios. So the first one is Amazon, its transformation in the early 2000s. So you may recall that the $1 billion re-architecture of Amazon was done because 2,000 to 3,000 engineers, certainly thousands of engineers, were unable to do work any longer, that even small things required huge amounts of communication and coordination. The evidence of this was that in the late 90s, as we put into the book, they were able to do hundreds of deployments per year, daily deployments. But as they added product categories, as they went from books to music to toys to clothing, 35 different categories, essentially their ability to ship code into production ground to a halt. Then it went from doing hundreds of deployments per day to being able to do maybe tens of deployments per year. Most deployments did not finish because something went wrong, because everything was coupled together. One of my favorite examples of this was in Werner Vogel's ACMQ article, which we cite in the book and the DevOps Handbook. But I didn't realize this phrase. I only discovered this one phrase earlier this year after studying that article for nearly a decade. There's this wonderful phrase that said, we ended up in this ridiculous situation where the Amazon digital teams had to provide so the Amazon digital team, that's like Kindle, Amazon Music, Amazon Video. When customers ordered them, they had to provide a physical shipping address, which is a bit absurd since there's actually nothing to fulfill. It's fulfilled digitally. So those teams went to 60 different ordering teams and said, hey, what would it take to change the pipeline so we don't have to provide a shipping address? To which they would hear, we didn't budget for it, sorry. And so they were stuck. And so even to get small things done, required massive amounts of communication, coordination, cajoling, politicking, escalation, right? Up 8 levels, down 8 levels, just to try to get multiple pieces of the system to work towards a common goal. And that was because it was a tightly coupled monolithic system where small teams required lots of coordination. Okay, so I told it about that. So the countermeasure for this was to divide it up into this monolith into microservices so that teams could work independently of each other without the need to communicate and coordinate. So this is the birth of the two-pizza team. This is that famous memo that came from Jeff Bezos, then CEO, chronicled by Steve Yegi, that said teams must henceforth communicate only through APIs. No backdoors allowed, no shared databases. Anyone who doesn't do this will be fired. And so this is what led to reestablishing hard modular boundaries between services and teams. They regained independence of action, and by 2011, they shocked the world by describing how they were doing 15,000 deployments per day. By 2015, they're doing 136,000 deployments per day. Right? Just amazing, all because of this, reestablishing or creating modularity, just like IBM did in the 1960s with the System 360. All right, so I wanted to ask ChatGPT. That's like a couch that was too big, that 1,000 of engineers were all coupled to, that no one had independence of action. Then I asked it to consider a second scenario, which is the Amazon Music. The Amazon Prime Video, audio video monitoring service. So this came out earlier this year. It kind of set the world afire because everyone was saying microservices are dead. Everyone should go back to monoliths, and it was a very interesting article, right? Because they noted that they had so many AWS step functions. The two most expensive operations in terms of cost were orchestration workflow and passing data between the components. In other words, you had all these services that, in order to do what they needed to do, they had to fetch these large, presumably large video files from an S3 storage bucket into their instance, transform it, and then put it back. And so when I heard about this, I thought that, so the answer was to put it back into a monolith. So they re-architected, and by putting everything back into one monolith, they were able to reduce the need to coordinate and transport data back and forth. So I go on in this prompt to say, so in the re-architecture of Amazon in the early 2000s, that's like taking one giant couch and chopping it up into thousands of couches so that teams could work independently of each other. What's interesting about the Amazon Prime Video example is that is as if by putting it into microservices, they had chopped up the couches too small. And now every time you want to do something, you have to coordinate across multiple couch teams. And I think the key point is that it's not only about coordination, it's about transport of data. So I wrote in this prompt, consider the second scenario of the Amazon video case study. They went from microservice architecture back to a monolith because of the amount of coordination and transport required. By putting it back into a monolith, they were able to preserve locality, and this is the equivalent of gluing couches together from too many little pieces. And by doing that, they created the right amount of coupling and cohesion so they could better achieve their goals. Could you please assess the effectiveness of this metaphor of a couch to represent coupling and cohesion? I actually got that question wrong because it did say, it's effective. What I meant to do is ask it about my interpretation of the two Amazon examples. So it did answer that. It was visual and relatable, illustrates complexity and simplicity. I love that. In fact, let's just go through this. The metaphor simplifies complex ideas like problem solving, teamwork, and resource management. The challenges of moving a couch neatly parallel the complexities found in organizational decision-making and process optimization. I love that. I would just say that's coordination cost, right? That's layer 3 coordination cost. Highlights the importance of autonomy and coordination. Yeah, I love that. Demonstrates the balancing of coupling and cohesion. Yeah, it highlights that the Amazon video case study represents reassembling the couch or gluing them together. You don't want too much independence, but enough to maintain efficiency and effectiveness. That's pretty good, but I would say, yeah, you want to have locality, which enables cohesion. And the metaphor addresses leadership challenges on how leaders can make work easier or harder, that the architecture informs that. So that's pretty good. Oh, yeah. Can you assess how the metaphor explains the before and after state of the Amazon video case study? And I just love this. Before state, microservices, couch in small pieces, high independence and low coupling. In the microservice architecture, each service operates independently, akin to the couch being chopped into small pieces. Each piece or service can be moved, developed, and managed independently. Right. That does reduce the need for coordination, but isn't this interesting? It increases coordination complexity. It increases the amount of coordination data transport. This is like having to move each piece of couch separately through a building, which can be more cumbersome than moving a single larger item. Yes. And the potential for inefficiency. By breaking things down too small, one might inadvertently create more complexity and inefficiency, especially when the pieces need to interact or fit together in a specific way. Yeah, that is great. So the after state, the couch reassembled. Reverting to a monolithic architecture is like gluing the pieces back together. It creates a more cohesive structure where the components are more tightly coupled and things are within reach. This reduces the amount of overhead and coordination. Reduces the amount of coordination, yep, and data transfer between services, yep. And increases locality. I just think that's so terrific. So I love this because this, in my mind, further validates how layer 3 wiring, right? So I'm not sure if I walked through this before. Layer 1 is, in fact, maybe I have a slide for this. Layer 1 is the where we do our work. Do I have that slide? Maybe not. Layer 1 is where we do our work. So that could be the code, the artifact running in production. That could be the patient that's being operated on. Layer 2 is the tools we use. So that could be the IDE, the platforms, our environments, the CT scanner, the MRI machine. And layer 3 is the social circuitry. This is the socio parts of the socio-technical system. This is what leaders are ultimately responsible for. Software architecture is a key piece of this. So this really validates my strong feeling and conviction that the couch metaphor is sufficient to describe what it looks like when we get the wiring wrong. And the fact that it can sort of express both the Amazon, the conditions that led to the great $1 billion Amazon re-architecture in the early 2000s, before and after state, and the opposite case where Amazon did the inverse of Amazon Prime Video, where they went from small pieces, microservices, and glued them all back together into a single monolith to increase cohesion and coupling. I think that's super cool. So I will publish this prompt. Let me just do that right now. Copy link. Right, so that anyone, you too, will be able to replicate those efforts. All right, so what's coming up next? In the next episode, what I will do is walk through some infrastructure that we built to do retrieval augmented generation. So that really helped my ability to generate some of these case studies, and I'll be doing a lot more of that in the future. All right, that's enough for today. Thank you so much, and catch you next time.